All right, let's dive into John Everett Millais' Ophelia.
Oh, Ophelia.
Yeah, you know that iconic image, Shakespeare's Ophelia floating, seemingly at peace.
A classic.
We're going to try to figure out how drowning, both literally and symbolically, can represent surrender, despair, and maybe even some kind of liberation.
Liberation, huh?
Hmm.
Most people focus on the tragedy of Ophelia's death, but Millais seems to be suggesting something else, don't you think?
Yeah, instead of showing a violent struggle, she's almost serene.
Right. He's asking us to think about her watery fate in a different way.
It's a fascinating contrast, right? You've got this
Yeah.
vibrant, lush, natural world, and then there's Ophelia just surrendering.
Before we get too deep into that, I think it's worth remembering how Millais changes things up from Shakespeare.
Okay, so how is it different?
Well, in Hamlet, Ophelia's madness is a lot more chaotic. Erratic behavior, fragmented speech, that kind of thing.
Right.
But Millais, he captures a moment of tranquility, her face, sure, there's sorrow there, but also acceptance, maybe even peace.
Yeah, it's like he's shifting the focus from the turmoil of her life to the stillness of her death.
Exactly. It's like he's saying, look, death isn't just a violent end, it's a transition.
Emerging with something bigger.
Yeah, and he really emphasizes this through all the details of nature surrounding her.
Each flower, each ripple in the water.
It's like he's created a whole symbolic landscape.
Oh, and speaking of those flowers, I know Victorians loved their flower symbolism.
Oh yeah, they were obsessed.
So he wasn't just scattering daisies around for no reason.
Definitely not. Each flower is loaded with meaning. Like, take the weeping willow over Ophelia. It symbolizes forsaken love and grief, reflecting Ophelia's tragic fate.
And what about those red poppies? They really stand out against all the soft colors.
Ah, good eye. Poppies were often connected with sleep and death, even oblivion.
Adding to that idea of Ophelia escaping the pain of life.
Exactly. And then you have violets scattered around her dress, symbolizing faithfulness and chastity.
Which are qualities often associated with Ophelia, despite everything that happens to her.
Right. Millais is packing so much meaning into one image.
It's like a visual poem.
Yeah, he's blending realism and symbolism, challenging viewers to look beyond the surface and think about what it all means.
Which leads us to the heart of our deep dive today, the act of drowning itself.
Right, we've talked about it physically, but what about symbolically?
Water has always been a powerful symbol, hasn't it?
Across cultures, throughout history, absolutely.
Transformation, purification, rebirth, like baptism rituals.
Or those cleansing ceremonies.
Even that mythical journey across the river Styx.
So drowning becomes something more than just dying.
It's symbolic, a passage into the unknown.
Exactly. And when we see Ophelia submerged, it's not just a tragic ending.
It could be a transformation, a release from her struggles.
Yeah, and Millais reinforces this by showing her with her eyes closed.
And a peaceful expression on her face.
It's like she's not fighting, but accepting it, embracing the power of the water.
Wow, that completely changes how I see the painting.
Right.
It's not just about tragedy anymore, but about finding peace, even liberation, through surrender.
And that brings us to one of the big questions about Ophelia.
What's that?
Was drowning a desperate act of surrender or deliberate choice?
A way to take back control in a world that took everything from her.
Exactly. And it's a question I don't think has an easy answer, but
It's definitely a powerful question.
yeah. But before we dive into that,
Yeah.
let's talk about the woman who brought Ophelia to life on canvas.
Oh yeah, Elizabeth Siddal.
There's a story there that adds a whole other layer of meaning to this already complex masterpiece. Now, Elizabeth Siddal, she wasn't just any model.
Oh, I know, I've heard a little about her.
She was a poet, an artist herself,
Wow.
a muse for a lot of those pre-Raphaelite guys,
Uh-huh.
the ones shaking up the art world.
Right, this rebels.
And Millais, he was all about realism, so he insisted that Siddal pose for Ophelia in a real bathtub full of water.
Wait, really? Like not some fake studio setup or something?
Nope, a real bathtub. And we're not talking a quick dip here.
Oh no.
Siddal spent hours and hours in that cold water with oil lamps underneath trying to keep it warm.
So Millais could get all the details just right.
Exactly. Every ripple, every fold of fabric.
That must have been awful. I can't even imagine.
It was grueling. And those lamps, they would go out sometimes, leaving her freezing for a long time.
Oh no.
And she got really sick.
I think I read she got pneumonia from it.
Yeah, some accounts say that.
That's a whole other level of suffering for your art.
Right. Makes you think about the cost of artistic vision, not just for the artist, you know?
But for everyone involved, it's
Yeah.
like it blurs the line between reality and the painting.
Yeah.
Knowing what Siddle went through, it's not just Ophelia anymore, it's a real woman's experience.
And her endurance, pushing herself for art.
It really makes you think.
And it adds to that whole question of agency, you know?
Right, right.
Subtle, like Ophelia, they were both in a world dominated by men.
Where women were often just seen as objects.
Yeah, their contributions minimized.
So they were both kind of surrendering themselves, their well-being, to what men wanted.
It's a valid interpretation,
Yeah.
especially when you think about the pre-Raphaelites themselves.
Right. They were all about challenging the traditional way women were shown in art.
Yeah, those idealized, almost sanitized images.
They wanted to show women as they really were.
Real, flawed, even tragic.
Which makes it interesting how Millais shows Ophelia with so much tenderness and beauty.
Mm-hmm. He doesn't shy away from the tragedy, but he's not exploiting it either.
There's respect there, even reverence.
Exactly, and I think that's why Ophelia is still so powerful.
It goes beyond the specific time it was made in.
It speaks to something universal about being a woman.
The struggle for agency, finding your identity.
And dealing with all those expectations society puts on you.
It's like the painting is a mirror, showing us our own anxieties, our own desire for freedom.
And that reflection can be both unsettling and empowering.
Yeah, it makes us face some uncomfortable truths.
But it also gives us a vision of transcendence, finding peace in the middle of all the chaos.
Speaking of finding peace, let's go back to that idea of drowning as a symbol.
Okay.
We talked about transformation and purification,
Right?
but I'm curious about how different cultures and myths have depicted it.
Oh, that's a great question. Drowning, it's different from other kinds of death.
How so?
It's often ambiguous, you know. Was it an accident, suicide, or something more deliberate?
Like a ritual or sacrifice?
Yeah, like in ancient Greece, you have the myth of Persephone.
Oh, yeah, taken to the underworld by Hades.
Right, and her journey across the river Styx, it's often seen as a symbolic drowning.
Like a descent into the unconscious.
Exactly. So even in mythology, drowning represents a transformation, a passage from one state of being to another.
And is that a common theme in other myths, too?
Oh, definitely. In some Native American cultures, for example, water is sacred, a source of life and healing.
Mm-hmm.
They had rituals where they would submerge themselves in rivers or lakes
To cleanse the spirit?
to shed the old self and be reborn, yeah.
It seems like these stories are tapping into something very deep in the human experience. That pull towards water, its power to destroy and create.
And that duality, it's perfectly captured in Millais' Ophelia.
The water takes her life, but also offers a chance for renewal.
To transcend the pain and limitations of her world.
And it makes me think about how we use drowning as a metaphor all the time.
Mm-hmm. Like drowning in sorrow, drowning in debt.
Drowning in work, it's like we understand that it's not just a physical act.
Right, it's a feeling, being overwhelmed, suffocated by life.
That's a really good point.
It reinforces the idea that Ophelia is more than just a painting.
It's a reflection of what it means to be human.
It speaks to our vulnerabilities, our anxieties.
Our desire to escape, and ultimately our hope for something more.
Beautifully put.
It's amazing how one artwork can hold so much meaning.
It really is.
And spark such deep reflection. But let's bring our deep dive back to the surface for a moment and talk about the elephant in the room, the painting's impact on art and culture.
Ah, yes. Ophelia didn't just stay on the museum wall, did it?
No, not at all. I mean, Ophelia, it's everywhere, you know.
It really is. Like, it's seeped into our culture, hasn't it?
It's become this symbol, you know, feminine fragility, beauty, and tragedy all wrapped up in one.
From literature to film, photography, music, it's everywhere you look.
Think of all those poems and songs inspired by Ophelia, or how she shows up in those modern Hamlet movies.
And photography, too.
Oh, yes, so many photographers are reinterpreting Ophelia, using water and flowers to explore all these different themes.
Identity, loss, you know.
Transformation. It just shows how strong that image Millais created really is.
It's so captivating, so full of symbolism, that it still speaks to people, to artists.
It makes them want to create their own interpretation.
And explore those themes in new ways, exactly.
It's almost like Ophelia has become this, like, archetype, this universal symbol for what it means to be a woman.
I think that's a great way to put it. And this archetype, it's not fixed. You know? It keeps changing, being reinterpreted with each generation.
Which makes me wonder, why do you think Ophelia still has this hold on us? Why are we still so drawn to her story after all this time?
I think it goes back to what we were talking about before.
About the painting tapping into something primal, something we all share.
Exactly. We see the beauty, of course, But there's more to it,
It makes us ask questions.
about life and death and how we deal with suffering.
It's like it forces us to confront our own mortality.
On vulnerabilities.
And it does it in a way that's both beautiful and kind of unsettling.
And maybe, by facing those things, we find some catharsis.
A way to deal with our own experiences with grief and loss.
Exactly.
But it also makes me think about how much our society romanticizes female suffering.
That's a good point.
Ophelia's story, that image, it's often used to show this kind of like idealized tragedy.
Beauty and pain, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and that's something we have to be careful about, right?
Absolutely. We can't just focus on how beautiful the painting is
We have to remember the time it was made in.
and how it's been used, sometimes in harmful ways, to tell certain stories about women.
So how do we appreciate the art, but also be critical of its impact?
It's about holding those two things together, you know?
Okay.
We can admire the technique, the vision, the emotions it evokes,
Right.
but also recognize its limitations, the biases of the time it came from.
It's about engaging with art actively, not just passively.
Questioning what we see, using it to start conversations about gender, representation, all those complex things.
Because that's what good art should do, right?
Exactly. Challenge us. Make us think differently about the world around us.
Well, as we wrap up our deep dive into Ophelia,
Yes.
I hope we've given you more than just facts. I hope we've sparked some new ideas, some new ways of looking at this painting.
And maybe the next time you see Ophelia in a museum or a book,
Or even just a quick reference in a song.
you'll stop and really look, Think about all the layers of meaning, just like the water surrounding Ophelia.
If Ophelia is a mirror reflecting back our anxieties and hopes, what does it show you? Think about that and keep exploring, keep questioning, keep finding beauty in the unexpected.
Until next time, dive deep.